No, our brokerage office is open. Our brokerage office is open.
Downstairs.
No, they've been open this whole time. You've been getting, I mean, everybody's been getting records. Oh, the physical, the law, yeah. Yeah, you have to do everything online. Yeah, like just like our front office shut down, yeah, it's the same, it's the same.
That's what they told me.
The only thing we're processing are second registration, appointments for, you know, to get and background. And then the only reason will be.
Do you know the turnover report on the I never.
I don't know, it's part of the time, Holly was saying that it was taking longer.
Okay, this is my first time today.
If they put it in the table, what they said at the hearing, and this is an actual like physical hearing. Oh,
It's similar to like City of Orlando.
it is, it's just a different program.
But it's things and stuff that they used to turn around in an hour, and now it's.
Then where you have to, like afterwards, you have to go and like rate it and everything. Sure, I passed the class. Did you have any real small groups? I had that like in Bridget. And just I had to like mess my stuff and baseball card. I look like I'm just happy you're rugby. Then you go, did I go? You get to look a lot of work into this. My next one Good.
All right, so Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. And the reason we are here is in less than 24 hours earlier this week, 2 innocent children in our community were gunned down in acts of targeted violence. On Monday night, 14-year-old Joshua Atkinson was visiting a neighbor on Glendale Road when he was shot by suspects in a vehicle. And the last night, in a drive-by shooting, 3 years old, Daquan Felix Jr. Was killed by gunfire while he was in his home on Drexel Avenue. But those were just 2 of the 4 drive-by shootings that have happened within this past week. Each one, we believe, our detectives believe, is an act of gang retaliation. So there are some very violent gangs here at work in Orange County. They're heavily armed and not afraid to use violence. And they don't think twice about who they kill. We've seen an increase in violence and retaliation that has intensified since drive-by shooting on Powers Ridge Court in July. At least 4 shootouts in public places took place between then and August 7th when deputies were trying to serve an arrest warrant. And in one of those shootings, Salathis Melvin, a gang member who was armed with a stolen handgun, was shot by a deputy outside a Florida mall. On that day, 3 gang members were present and there were 3 guns recovered. So this rash of violence and the fact that these gang members are heavily armed this is the reason why we collect intelligence. This is the reason why we have detectives in plainclothes. This is the reason why we do surveillance in unmarked cars, because these gang members, they don't stop for marked cars. They don't stop for our regular deputies. So we have to be a little smarter than them and do a lot of surveillance and use a lot of different techniques to catch them off guard. So this focus on this recent gang violence is our #1 priority right now. And we are going to catch them. We're going to catch all of them, and we're going to put them in prison. So we've assembled an internal task force here. We're working with the Orlando Police Department, who have experienced some of these rash of shootings as well. We're also working with the State Attorney's Office and the U.S. Attorney's Office to adopt cases federally where we can. So because of our efforts so far, we've been working these cases going back to July. We have made 20 arrests and recovered over 24 firearms. Many of them stolen, some of them high-powered rifles that can shoot through buildings and shoot through the body armor that our deputies wear. So here's where we need the community's help. Many times our community members in these neighborhoods see these violent gang members holding guns, carrying guns, putting guns into vehicles. You can call anonymously. You can call us and tell us that, hey, there are gang members putting rifles into this car, into this blue car. We think they're going to do something. That's where we need the community's help. That's where the community can help us most. And then we also need help from the family members who are associated with these gang members. They know their young sons, and in some cases daughters, are involved in gangs, are gang members, and are carrying guns. We need their help, or else these retaliation shootings are going to continue to happen. So in the case of Joshua Atkinson, who was not involved in gang activity, his family told him, don't hang out with those boys, but he went anyway, and now he's dead. So that is a incredibly tragic and tough lesson for all parents. Trust your instincts. Watch who your kids are hanging out with. Watch what they are doing. In a moment, I'm going to have Bishop Derek McCrae from the Experience Christian Center come up and speak as well. But first, I'm going to call on Sergeant Paul Volkerson to go over in some more detail about some of these cases.
Like Sheriff Mina stated, combating violence is the top priority of our agency. Right now, with the current gang feud going on, there's no other priority in this agency that's as high as that one. And moving forward, we will be targeting these criminals involved in the gang activity and violence. Even though this violence is targeted gang-on-gang violence, There's innocent families, innocent children that are being affected by this violence. May not be targeted to them, they're an innocent bystander, and they are getting negatively affected by this violence. I'm going to walk you guys through a couple of the incidents that have happened over the last several months to kind of give you an idea of the pattern of violence we're seeing here in Orange County. July 7th, Powers Ridge Drive shooting, like the sheriff brought up. It was a drive-by shooting that was conducted by Jeremiah Robinson, who's a documented Army gang member. During that drive-by shooting, he was shot and killed by Van Sean Sands, who's a rival 438 gang member. Van Sean Sands was not arrested that day for any violation, but later on the detectives did develop charges to make an arrest on Van Sean Sands. The following 3 weeks after this shooting, we had 3 drive-by style shootings that were retaliatory shootings related to the 7th shooting, July 7th shooting, where Jeremiah Robinson was killed. On August 2nd, in Rolling Hills apartment complex, it's a family apartment complex, family members live there, children live in there. In the middle of the day, there was a rolling and driving gun battle that happened between 2 different gang member groups. During that shooting, there was an innocent 12-year-old boy that was in his grandma's apartment being babysat by grandma. One of the rounds penetrated the wall and struck the 12-year-old in the stomach. The 12-year-old did survive his injuries, but he had no involvement in this gang-on-gang violence, and he was negatively affected by being shot during the shooting. We have not made an arrest on that case yet. The detectives are still working very hard on that case, and we're hoping in the near future to make an arrest on that case. Fast forward to August 7th. The detectives were making contact with Van Sean Sands to arrest him for his involvement in the death of Jeremiah Robinson during the Powers Ridge Drive shooting. They made contact with him at the Florida Mall to serve the arrest warrant on him and Christopher Bennett, who's also a 438 gang member who had an active warrant for his arrest. During the takedown, Salathis Melvin was shot by deputies, and the evidence collected following that at the scene, there was 3 firearms recovered, one of which was a stolen firearm. Fast forward 3 days to August 10th. On Pine Hills Road, there's a daycare center. One of the Army gang members was at the daycare center picking up his children, 1 3, 1 4 years old. As he exited the daycare center, was loading his kids into the back seat of his car, a drive-by shooting was conducted where his car was struck several times. Several of the rounds penetrated the car with his small children inside the car as he was loading them in. Some of the rounds missed his car, struck the daycare center, and went through the walls of the daycare center. This daycare center is full of innocent children, workers that are watching their kids while families are at work and drop their kids off at the daycare center. Some of the workers were almost struck by the rounds that penetrated the wall of the daycare center. Also, the children were put in danger by the rounds going into the daycare center. Fast forward to this week, on Monday night on Glendale Road, there was a drive-by style shooting. 14-year-old was killed during that shooting. Another 15-year-old was injured as a result of the drive-by. We believe this is all related to the gang-on-gang violence and the retaliatory shootings back and forth. Later on that same night, there was another shooting on Pine Hills Road. Very busy road here in Orange County. Everyone's aware of that. This house was struck several times during the drive-by shooting. Nobody was injured. But if you go back over the course of the last month, that house was shot up 2 additional times during drive-by style shootings. So it's a retaliation that keeps going back and forth between these rival gangs. And the violence is affecting everybody in the community. Last night, around 9 p.m., there was another drive-by shooting that occurred where the residence was struck several times. No one inside the residence was injured. And approximately 25 minutes after that shooting was another drive-by style shooting where 3-year-old Daquan was shot and killed during the drive-by. If you go back and look at it, it's just constant over and over violence that these gang members are retaliating with each other on. Our detectives, just so everyone's aware, are working very hard. We have some of the best detectives here in Orange County. They're working hard to solve these cases. Every day we get new evidence in these cases, and we're working very diligent to make arrests and get these violent gang members off the street so they quit affecting our community negatively. We do need cooperation from the public. We'll need eyewitnesses that'll come forward to us. If you don't feel comfortable coming forward publicly, you can contact Crime Line at 423-TIPS. Their information, you can remain anonymous. We'll get the information to help us solve the cases we need. Also, victims. The victims in these cases a lot of times do not cooperate with law enforcement. It's important that we get the victim cooperation in these cases to make a solid case and have a successful prosecution of these violent offenders. If we get them prosecuted for these violent crimes, we'll get them off the street for an extended period of time. And I'd like to turn it over to Bishop McRae now.
Thank you. Again, when you think about what we're dealing with, one of the first things that kind of comes to mind is that every parent always believes and desires to be able to raise a child in the right way. And I'm hearing so many stats and so many different situations, and it seems to highly be involving parents, involving children, which shows me that we have to be more consistent and we have to do a better job in parenting in our communities. I'm calling for the community to help us in such a way by being responsible for your kids, having more discussions with your kids, and not only having discussions with your kids, but also looking out for the better behaviors of the kids. It's really unfortunate when you're finding that it's no longer just the gangs that are being affected, but it's those individuals in our communities as well who are being affected. And so it brings me to 2 points. The first thing that I think that we really have to maximize on more is what Sheriff Mina said today, prevention. We have to become the eyes and the ears. There are anonymous methods in which we can report different scenarios and situations that are happening. Maybe your judgment is going to be wrong, but we rather you side on the wrong side of judgment than we find that another life has been taken in our communities. The second thing that I really want to encourage us to do is to be also of assistance. A lot of times we come back into our communities and our neighborhoods, and it's amazing how muffled we become because of sometimes the fear that exists in our neighborhoods. But we find that when we're now developing a lifestyle of fear because nobody wants to come forward. I'm asking everybody that is involved, if you have been the victim of it, if you know of anyone who has been involved in it, it becomes our duty to help better our communities, our streets. We always talk about disrest or discomfort in our communities. I think when we come together and we begin to speak, talk, bridge community again, it's at that place that we'll find ourselves being able to really come to solutions. I think it's time for us to work together. The community has to work together with law enforcement officers. There must be a common touch between the two. Establishments of trust, establishments of goals that we want to accomplish. I've been in talk with the sheriff and with Under Sheriff Canty as well. And we're really trying to work on some collaborative efforts where we can bring community and law enforcement together to develop that relationship, to further develop that relationship, because I think we both have the same goal. We want to see safety in our neighborhoods. And so with the crime that is happening, something must be done, and it has to be done immediate, because each night we're serving as a risk. We're seeing risk take place each night that we do not know what might take place because of something that might have happened in the past. And so I'm asking our communities to come together. I'm asking our faith communities, let's join together in prayer. But prayer is not enough. We got to put some work along with the prayers. And we got to ask for the parents to join in with our communities as well to see a difference take place. If we come together, we can always find that we are able to accomplish any task that comes before us. I'm a preacher, so I'll close with the scripture. Genesis, the 11th chapter, verse number 6 simply says, because the people are come together and they are one, nothing they imagine to do will be restrained from them. If we're going to see resolve, peace, and solidarity in our communities, it has to come from us joining together, law enforcement officers, as well as communities, victims, and those who are just bystanders, all communicating together to see the end that we all desire, which is unity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bishop. And I also want to recognize former Commissioner Rod Love is here as a community leader. And also I see Bishop Cabarrus has come as well. They've all been great partners here in Orange County to help prevent violence. And you heard Bishop McRae say, we are one. We have to be one with this community. With that being said, I know probably over the last 4 or 5 months, and even longer than that, there's been a lot of talk about over policing of some of our more underserved communities. But let me make this very clear. We are going to be in that community to prevent a 3-year-old from being shot and killed. We have to be in that community. And I expect that community will demand that we be in their community, putting these violent offenders behind bars where they belong. We are going to continue to collaborate with our community leaders, with our faith-based community, in order to work on that prevention side, to see what we can do in some of our more underserved neighborhoods. But we are going to be in those neighborhoods. We are going to be taking the bad guys off of our streets to help keep our community safe. So at this time, I'll kind of open it up for questions from any of you. I'm going to let Sergeant Volkerson answer that.
So a lot of these, the little beef that goes back and forth, a lot of it is based on social media, that one gang will feel the other gang is not respecting them, or they've been disrespected by the rival gang, and they will pretty much taunt each other back and forth on social media. And that seems to be the driving force behind the current gang feud, is social media and the back and forth between the groups.
What connection specifically these homes on Glendale Drive will have to the Army and the 438 gangs? Have you been able to figure that out?
So some of the homes that have been targeted are occupied, or members of the 438 or Army gang will stay in those residences. We have been able to tie them back to members of the gangs.
So people living in those homes?
Or either living there, or they'll frequent those homes.
Can you tell us about the shooting last night?
Yes.
Was the child outside? How did this happen?
Sergeant Cavelli, he's with our homicide unit. He's probably the better to answer all the details on that one for you guys. So if you like it, turn it over to him.
Reference 3-year-old. The child was inside the house. Obviously, you guys know it was a drive-by shooting. The car that was driving by shot indiscriminately at that house, at the residence of that house. The house was approximately occupied by 9 people. It's amazing nobody else was hit. The child was playing, just being a child. So.
How did that relate to Monday's shooting? Was that in retaliation for the shooting?
These shootings are all gang related. Retaliation, I'm not going to say that was retaliatory towards that. There's different sides here, there's different factions, but they're all gang related and they all have something in common. And that's the guns, and these are almost kids with guns.
So which gang was shooting last night and which gang was shooting the night before?
So last night the victims were 438s. Now, the gang that was shooting, that's still to be determined. That's what we're trying to figure out. That's part of our investigation.
So you mentioned the Army gang, you mentioned the 438s. How many are there? How organized are they? And how many numbers do they have?
That's a good question, and that's what we're working on. They have a pretty decent sized membership. They have associates, so they get documented as a gang member. They're set to fit a certain criteria, but then there's associates, people that just kind of hang out with them. They're not documented, but they just kind of hang out with them. And there's a lot of gangs in Orlando.
Are they rappers? Are they drug dealers? I'm hearing there's been some rapper wars mixed up into some of this.
Yeah, Sergeant Volker, he's the expert on that one, but yes, there are rappers. There's the rap labels that are going with each other. So,
Sheriff, I have a question. This comes back to July. We have a 12-year-old shot and survived, a daycare shot up, a 14-year-old killed, now a 3-year-old killed. Why has it taken 3 months for the community to learn that this is all part of gang violence and retaliation back and forth?
Well, we've been putting this information out as we receive it. And remember, we don't always know exactly what happened. That's why we have to do our investigation. A lot of times we don't release information like that if we think it will help us in our investigation and lead to arrest.
Okay, is there a reason to release it now?
We want to let the community know about it. We've obviously identified for sure, especially these ones that we talked about today, were definitely targeted gang violence. So, one of the main reasons for this press conference, not only to notify the community about what happened last night and the night before with these juveniles being shot, but also to ask for the help. And what Bishop McCray mentioned, that, we know there are people in our community who know these gang members, see them get into their cars with their guns, see where they're going. We want people to call us and let us know what's going on in their community so we can stop the violence.
Can you give us a sense of how your department is going to protect the identity of these people who would call you?
Just like in any other case, we have crime line. You can call 911. You can remain anonymous. If you don't give us your name, we're not going to be able to find out who you are. So we do want witnesses to come forward and to testify, but we know that can't always be the case. A lot of times we just need a name. We just need a location. We need to know where the gun is, and that could all be done anonymously, and it's helped us in the past solve some crimes. And like I said, we've made over 20 arrests. Our agency is working very hard toward this. We are pouring a lot of resources in there. There's going to be a lot of marked units. There's going to be a lot of unmarked units. There's going to be more plainclothes. There's going to be more surveillance because our focus is stopping this violence.
Sure. You mentioned that if somebody sees something, say something, but are there other key words that people should be able to look out for, whether it's in the school or a neighborhood, like, for instance, you said Army, 438. Are there other names that people should be more cognizant of or be listening to? And to follow up, how many people are we talking about?
Well, what I would say to our community is don't be focused on the name of a gang or numbers. I would be focused on, I saw a gun in the hands of a 14-year-old. They got into this car and they're in front of this house. That's what the message is to our community. That's what we need them to help us with.
Shouldn't they know what other gangs are out there? I mean, you said Army 438. What other gangs are there that they should be listening to?
So again, we have a variety of gangs here in Orange County. We have had them for 30, 40, 50 years. The important piece is that if you see a crime being committed, we're not expecting you to identify that as a gang, but we are expecting that if you see a 14 or 15-year-old with a gun, that you would call 911 and let us know about that. I think that's the easiest way for our community to understand rather than worrying about which gang is doing what.
What are you doing specifically tonight for the families in these neighborhoods? Are you guys going to increase patrols tonight? Are you out there tonight?
Yeah, so you'll see increased activity out there, but we're not going to go into all the different specifics. So, we've been doing a lot of things over these past several months that have led to all these arrests and guns being recovered. We're going to continue that along with an increased presence and an operational plan that I can't go into.
Sure. Just on Monday night, do we know that how this field is doing, and also was the 15-year-old a part of one of these groups that you're talking about, and do we know, what group was targeted in that? I know you said 438.
Yeah, so it's all still part of the investigation to see how everyone was tied into that.
Are you saying that there is a member of the 438 gang that lives in the home where Daquan was shot?
One more time?
Are you saying that there is a member of the 438 gang that lives or visits the home where Daquan was shot?
There are gang members who either live or frequent that home where the 3-year-old was shot, killed, yes.
Sure. Given the current climate of, there's a lot of tension between community and police, which I imagine I appreciate, our community leaders here today. Do you feel like that has a factor in the fact that maybe you're having more trouble solving these cases? And again, how are we overcoming that distrust right now?
I've been a law enforcement officer in this community for 30 years. I think we have good relationships within this community. We always endeavor to continue to build that trust. But since I was a young officer on the street, having people come forward, especially from some of our more underserved populations and communities that have had decades and decades of mistrust going back to the 50s and 60s and 70s has always been a challenge. I would say it hasn't changed with what's happened here in the past 6 months in our nation. It has always been a struggle. That's something that we try hard to work on every single day through hiring and recruitment, through engagement, community engagement activities, and through everything else that we do.
One last question. What's your status of the 15-year-old who was shot Monday night?
Do we have the status of the 15-year-old?
He's critical and stable.
Critical but stable.
Really, I just want to get your reaction to an email that I received from a mother who lives in this community where the guy was shot. She wrote me an email and she said, I'm hoping that you can help. I'm a concerned parent who wants to highlight the extraordinary rate
since the pandemic that's leading to gang and street violence in my neighborhood. My 16-year-old ran away from home. There is nothing I can do. He was an honor student at Evans High School who has stopped going to school. I visited a number of agencies trying to get help, and I'm being told that nothing can be done until my son is arrested. He's now getting into gang sites, posting them on social media. There are no resources to help Black neighborhoods to prevent the young people from getting into this trouble. Hence, young gang-related incidents like this. Please help. What do you say to a parent like this when she's crying out?
Well, I would say that's very sad and tragic that someone who was once an honor student is now running around with gangs, and that is part of our struggle. That a 16-year-old who doesn't want to be found by law enforcement is not going to be found if he's staying with other gang members, if he's out there living on the streets. And a lot of times in those kind of cases, the best thing that can happen to that young man is being arrested and being put on the right path. And part of the discussion we had earlier with these community leaders is doing what we can to help funnel money through maybe some different programs who can reach a young man like that, and maybe not necessarily some of the traditional programs that receive all the money. And very tragic, but yeah, anytime you have a 16-year-old that drops out of school and is now running with gangs, that's just a recipe for disaster. So we want to get that juvenile back home and back on the right track. So again, the message to our community: we can't do this alone. We are going to do everything that we can in our power to protect your communities, and make no doubt about it, these gang members responsible for this violence in our community will be held accountable for their actions and go to jail and prison. Thank you.
Sure, excuse me for being so cynical, but you're asking parents to turn in their children and neighbors to turn in their neighbors.
So the alternative is having their 3-year-old family member killed. All right. So if that were me, if my elderly son was knowingly involved in gang violence and carrying guns, and then my family member who was 3 years old was killed as a result of that, you're darn right I would get involved and turn him in. Thank you.
Thank you.